I am Dustin Gouker. I am the head of content for a number of sites that cover the sports betting and gambling space in the United States, including legalsportsreport.com, Online Poker Report, PlayUSA, and thelines.com. I've been doing this for about 5 years, starting with the advent of the daily fantasy sports craze with FanDuel and DraftKings. Covered the Supreme Court case where the sports betting ban was uh, taken away, and been covering the industry ever since. And yeah, happy to provide any insight I can.
Awesome. And Eliot, last but not least.
Yeah, I'm Eliot Crist. I'm the COO of FTN Fantasy, FTN Bets, and FTN Daily. I've been a sports bettor for over 12 years, been playing fantasy for 18, been in this industry for about 5 now. Really focused on creating content and tools and technology to help educate sports bettors, to help them learn how to become a winning sports bettor and develop their game to be bigger than just who's the right side to bet, but why is the right side to bet, and what is the value of lines, and how to shop, and how to understand the value of all the different books.
Awesome. Thanks. So let's go to our first question, which is pretty basic and it's a big topic. But now that we're 4 months into the restart of sports, I want to know what each of your biggest takeaways have been from this entire shift in the sports and sports betting worlds. Dustin?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing I've seen in the world today is that there's just a huge pent up demand. We saw absolutely record numbers of people betting in legal U.S. markets in August, when there were lots of sports going on. Nevada no longer the biggest market in terms of sports betting, largely because online betting is way more available in other states. I think Nevada, they still have remote in-person registration, whereas New Jersey, Pennsylvania, elsewhere, they have remote registration where you can sign up from anywhere in the state. So this pent-up demand, and we've kind of seen it just in kind of hyperdrive, I'd say, with interest in sports betting. We're just actually going to get the September numbers in New Jersey, the biggest market, later today, and we'll see exactly how much the sports betting industry has grown. But I think this is a trend across gambling and not just sports betting, that there's a lot of pent up demand in the era of coronavirus, where there's limited options. And when we have ability to actually, when things come back, when you have all the sports going on, when you have NFL going on, there's just been a lot of demand for that product in the legal and regulated market.
I want to ask you a follow-up question, just because I'm interested, but I know August was just a bonkers month in New Jersey, all-time record of any state. Do you think September comes anywhere close to it, or even passes it?
Yeah, I've been debating this already, just because we don't know. NFL is usually the biggest time for what's going on in the sports betting industry, but we had this perfect storm in August of literally every sport but that. The volume of things you can bet on in August was so high, with NBA, NHL, MLB games all going on. There's less games to bet on in September, but NFL is here, so this will be really interesting. I think the side light to that is that we've seen this trend of ratings being down in some of these other sports other than NFL. NFL has not been trending down as quite as much as these, but the sports betting has been up. As again, this is supply, in that there's more states, more sports books open, but the trend of sports betting is going away from the TV ratings. So anyway, I'm not sure I'm prepared to say New Jersey will be bigger. I think it's going to still be big, and in Nevada too, it's NFL is its bread and butter. This is what most people bet on. People bet more on the NFL in Nevada. Will go into the sports books and bet. So it'll definitely be interesting to see what September looks like in a world where we just have football and a lot of still NBA and Major League Baseball going on.
Yeah, it's funny you talk about those ratings being down like more than 50% for NBA and NHL each for the finals compared to last year, but the betting numbers and digital impressions and stuff are still crazy. It's great. It's a weird world right now. Eliot, what's been your biggest takeaway the last 4 months or so?
Yeah, I would say that sports are recession proof. In terms of the sports betting market, we're looking at April, when the only things to bet on were Russian ping pong and the NFL draft, and Russian ping pong did $33 million in the state of New Jersey. And I think the ratings has a lot more to do with all the competition than it does people's lack of interest in sports. And I think it's just a market that's going to continue to grow as states figure out how to open up. Illinois wanted to do this in-person registration despite the fact that there was a pandemic. They opened it up for a couple weeks to do online registration, and that blew up. But New Jersey, Pennsylvania has shown that's an incredibly valuable market. New Jersey is about to launch their 19th sports book this week, actually, with Tipico launching. So, I think that the demand for sports betting and the market is just, we're just scratching the surface, and this is going to be one of the biggest industries in all of sports.
And Ed, your biggest takeaway?
Well, I kind of have two, and I'll go fairly quickly. One is I'll call it before DraftKings went public, and then right. And I think DraftKings doing an IPO when all sports had stopped in the middle of COVID, no one knew what was happening, and how the value immediately increased. And I think today it's up almost 190% from its initial IPO, says a lot about everything that Dustin and Eliot were communicating. But even more to that, it's legitimized the market, especially among institutional investors and among other third parties. Now where you're seeing deal after deal with leagues where that was always taboo, it's not that anymore. It's fair game anywhere. So I'd say one, and I'd say two, which is kind of leading into more of the topic of this, is it's a very immature category still. And although sports betting and fantasy has been around a long time, the consumer demand has exponentially increased, but the level of sophistication necessarily across the board in terms of providing consumers with what they want, what they expect, both in an experience and with what they need to experience in terms of brand and how they're marketed to, how they're communicated to, that still lags behind, especially in the US. And so I think there's so much out there that's happening, but that's kind of the next thing that has to move forward in a more sophisticated way.
Okay. Before we get kind of more into the loyalty and bettors, sports bettor loyalty, let's talk about kind of the unknowns right now in the sports world. I mean, we came out of the NHL and NBA bubbles, pretty, no cases. Those got through and finished. But Major League Baseball had their issues before they went into the playoff bubble. College football's had plenty of its issues. Nick Saban coming, testing positive yesterday. NFL teams continue to come down with the virus. I guess, what do these unknowns kind of contribute to the sports betting world right now? And before I ask a panelist a question, the poll is live about NFL and COVID. But Eliot, let's start with you about kind of how the unknowns affect the
I honestly think the unknown will drive more people to sports betting and daily fantasy sports and away from fantasy sports, because the frustrations of, having a team and then games constantly changing and not knowing all that kind of stuff. I see it every day among subscribers and people talking about how frustrating fantasy football has been, and that they'd rather try, a once a day thing where I know the game's happening. They're not going to cancel the game in the middle of it at halftime because COVID hit, right? I think this is something that everyone should have understood, that this was going to be part of things. If you're not going to do it in a bubble, you're going to have travel, you're going to have people live their lives. It's the same thing it is across the country. People are going to get COVID. I actually think the NFL has done a pretty good job so far. They've canceled games. They've shut down facilities. We haven't seen it spread across the league. There's definitely individual cases. The Titans are far and away the worst. We'll see what happens with the Falcons. But, I think this was all something that, for me, was expected. Like, I don't quite understand how we thought we were going to have a country, or we're going to have 32 teams across the country fly all over the place with 90-man rosters and no one ever get COVID. So I think it's definitely disruptive. I think we live in a world where people want to be, or they just are, extremely reactionary. But I still think the demand for the games are every bit there. I just think that people are going to move more towards daily formats as opposed to the traditional fantasy. And that's huge for the betting market, right? Because there's over 60 million fantasy players across the country. And if those guys start looking to bet, that's going to accelerate the betting market even quicker.
I'm with Elliot on this. I think makes sports betting and even DFS just a way more compelling product. Like I haven't seen any data on attrition with season long, but I know, I mean, just personally, I usually play in a lot of fantasy baseball leagues. I play in NFL leagues most years. Like it's hard to look at the world the way it is and say, oh man, season long is a really great product. It's really hard to like get into a season long product when you're looking at constant cancellations, players that you have no control over getting sick or having to go on a quote unquote COVID list. Like sports betting is made for this, right? You can look at the data in front of you. You can say, okay, I know these guys are not playing, or this game has been moved, and you have that information in front of you. It really should be, DFS has been trying to make this case for a long time that it's, instead of, don't worry, you don't have to worry about injuries and stuff like that and people getting sick. You have this great product where you can just one day and it's gone. So, and you don't have to worry about the rest of it. So it really should be a compelling product right now in sports betting too, that you look at what's going on in the world. You only have to look at this narrow slice. I mean, we're not talking about futures bets, but this narrow slice, this one game, and you can account for that in real time.
Ed, do you have
I can't agree with any of my fellow panelists. We did a survey right at the beginning of football season on purpose. We spoke to a sampling of both sports bettor and fantasy sports player. There was a little bit of a moment of, I don't know how excited I am. 25% said they may do things less, but I don't think that ever happened. They may play less. They may not bet as much. I think they were nervous about it, but I agree with both these guys that the opportunity is there for really daily in terms of how bettors and fantasy players look at this. I think for platforms, content providers, others out there, I think you have to look at this as an opportunity in terms of how you make yourself more relevant, how you differentiate yourself, how you create a stronger brand, how you shift left and right based on what you're seeing. And so in some cases, for some, it's harder out there, but there is real opportunity because the interest is only growing, whether it be state by state or across the board. So it's like, what do you do in these different times to make yourself that much more appealing? And that's really the key takeaway here. We're seeing with some that we deal with, there's a little bit of paralysis. You shouldn't feel that way versus how do you get out there and push in the right way and be strategic?
So let's move into a little bit more about customer loyalty. I mean, 60% of sports bettors and fantasy players aren't loyal to one platform. And we have an audience question kind of relates to that. Daniel asks, what are the main factors influencing a bettor's decision to choose one sportsbook over another? So I guess, Ed, let's start with you.
I think that there are a lot of reasons. And, I would say almost, you can't completely separate it, but there's probably a difference between the more hardcore sports bettor who is really looking for multiple places based on the odds, understands the game, and thinks, I'm not going to be loyal to any one sports book, and this is the way I'm going to do it. And that's a smart way to do it versus the millions who are now becoming regular or just trying sports betting and playing fantasy on a daily basis. And for that group, which is where all the excitement's around and where all the money's coming into, I think that one of the things for loyalty that's really important is how do you build trust and credibility? And what we're seeing is the promotions and the advertising, that's part of the issue here in an immature market. I'm sure there's not one of us who doesn't look at their Facebook account and see, dozens of different ads coming up with promos. There isn't a lot of thought in many of those about brand and the importance of brand and how to really engage culturally and do great creative and other things. And there's not a lot of thought going into the importance of retention versus just conversion. It's about, with many, it's how do I convert? How do I convert? But versus how do I build trust and loyalty to get them over and over and over again? So the challenge really is, how can you look at your brand as really a brand, the way, love them or hate them, the way a Barstool has? They've built a real brand in this area. And there's a following, and they will probably make out because of that in terms of what they've done. Or even look at your brand the way alcohol brands are. Great example. It's culturally based, much like this is. So, no beer brand thinks they're going to be the only beer, but Dos Equis with, the most interesting man in the world hopes it's one of a selection of beers that target guy goes to, basically. And that's really important. And the other quick things I would just say are, a lot of it is, how do you build credibility in the right way with looking at the media you use and how you mix it up and how you use video and audio and things like that, and even the different mediums that you advertise in? And how do you leverage things that are going to build credibility so that others are going to be influenced and refer you? And that's getting your name out there in the right way. With some of our panelists, including you, Pat, how do you get out there and build your name through PR to make sure your entity is being seen as unique in different ways? But I think the key thing is the sports, the way that advertising is done now, promotion is done now, it's a sea of sameness, and it has to be, the level of that has to change in terms of sophistication. Many emerging industries have faced this, and they've all changed, but some companies haven't survived, and part of it's because of the way they market and go to the office. Last thing I'll just say on this is there's a lot of content out there on a lot of sites, and it's about the experience too. And in this category, it's amazing how we try to overwhelm. We don't try to overwhelm, but we do overwhelm the user because we want to give them so much great content. Well, in some cases, that turns them off because users need it simple. They need to understand the experience in a very easy way, and it needs to live up to the promise that's being promoted in that ad or whatever is being said. So we have to think about even how we use content on the sites that we have.
I know Eliot probably has some thoughts on this because he talked about this the other day while we were preparing for this. But I do want to go to Dustin first because, and it might be opening up a different weird can of worms just because I know he's been, Ed mentioned Barstool, and I know Dustin's been chatty about Barstool on Twitter. So I want to ask him kind of what he thinks about that customer engagement they have and if that's going to help drive loyalty or just kind of how you feel about that.
Hey, look, I mean, sportsbooks are in the business that Eliot and I are in, right? They're doing content and to increasing and signing deals. DraftKings and FanDuel have been doing content for a long time, and that's part of their strategy is to provide their own content and their own messaging. And Barstool, Penn National Gaming acquired Barstool for this express purpose to use their content as a way to engage with and personally engage with respondents. Look, I don't love Barstool and their core business, but they do a lot of smart stuff for sure. I'll drop some of the survey in here. 36% of respondents said they'd be more loyal if the ads promotions were more personal, witty, or connected with them beyond promo codes. And it got into that, like the initial conversion from non-sports to not using your sportsbook to sportsbook. That's that's a promo code, a lot of money here. Come bet with us. But the retention is definitely an interesting part of all of this and how you connect with them. Just giving people boilerplate, oh, hey, there's Major League Baseball playoffs going on. That's not good retention or a good retention model. There's lots of retention out there right now with a DraftKings, with a lot of these sites that are doing promos that are ridiculous sport point spreads that are obviously going to hit and are just free money. So that's not necessarily more personal either, but it's a different way to retain that we haven't necessarily seen all along. So honestly, Barstool does a good job of this. They've already done things where you get free sandwiches, you get the special jacket if you do this overs club where you bet $100 on whether a total will go over or not. They're doing creative things that nobody else is doing, and it's partly because of their model and what their audience, and they should be good at this, and that's part of the salesmanship. But it is interesting that FanDuel especially has done a ton to acquire people to do this content for themselves. Pat McAfee is the best example of this. Prolific podcaster turned himself into a brand, and FanDuel is really is hitching themselves to personalities and creating content around that. And it's an interesting way. And, you know, we have all these other media deals we could get into, like just today, DraftKings and FanDuel signed with Turner Sports, with TBS, TNT. But there's a lot going on in the content world and trying to personalize your message for the sportsbook's message for individual people and individual audiences.
You know, if I could just even jump on something Dustin said, which I think is really interesting, what Barstool is doing with, you know, customized special jackets and things like that. I mean, again, you look at industries that are more mature, that have been around a long time, like restaurants who have loyalty programs, and other industries that bring people in. What Barstool is doing is nothing unique compared to that, but within this industry, it is. And FanDuel and DraftKings are starting to do a lot of those things as well. And I think what companies in this space really need to look at is how they can do things to really draw that kind of loyalty from customers and use influencers in different ways like that as well. Great examples, Dustin.
And now bringing it back to Eliot on this subject, I want to talk. You said the other day that Ed mentioned it's a very immature market in the U.S., but Eliot, you said the other day that, you know, smart bettors don't stay, you know, they shop around. So I guess how does that play into kind of how operators need to look at loyalty?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a pretty complex question. I mean, the simplest answer is that if you are a consumer, you should not be loyal to a sports book, right? I mean, there's no reason to ever bet on something +3 instead of +3.5. You should have multiple books. Now, why you should probably have 3 to 4 books in order to do line shopping. This has been a more difficult thing for people in the past. At FTN Bets, we've come out with basically Google search technology where you can type in any player now and you can compare player props across every different book. And that kind of thing wasn't there. So that was actually working in the book's advantage. As we continue to go throughout time, I think they're going to have more and more struggles with people line shopping because they're going to get taught to do that. Now, I think the 3 biggest things that operators can do is, first is a good app, a good website, easy to navigate, easy to find things. The number of times I interact with consumers, you know, because I'm on the other side, I'm on the content, I'm trying to beat the book. They can't find bets. That drives people nuts. It's not well organized information. The app struggles. They can't find things. That's the first thing. The second thing is customer service. So many of these operators are growing so quickly that, I mean, FanDuel and DraftKings have the advantage in the United States, having already developed a user base with DFS with over 6 million people. You know, they have a massive advantage on everybody else. But winning a customer service battle is huge, because when people put their money on something, the sense of entitlement, you know, is there. They want to know what's happening with their money. If there's a reason for anything that it falls apart, you need to have good customer service. And I think this is something that these sites lack across the board. You know, a live chat where you get someone that basically just is rating off a QA. You get on a phone call that can't do anything. No one can do anything with you, and then it takes you 24 hours to get in contact with someone. And most of the time, it's too bad, so sad. When you're putting, and then at that point, you've turned off a customer. I think the last point is the content, and I think a lot of these sports books are going about it wrong, to be honest. We talk about how this is becoming a new industry, and you know, everyone's in customer acquisition and not retention mode, and they're forming these content partnerships with places like PointsBet did NBC, MGM did Yahoo, right? FanDuel bought Numberfire years ago and had that branch. DraftKings does their own thing. And really, when I'm doing this, I'm talking more about outside DraftKings and FanDuel, because, you know, I just look at DraftKings stock price; they're doing a good job. But they're attaching themselves with national brands, right? Because they're trying to reach as many people as possible. And they're having people. Fox Bet is a great example. They're having people talk about sports betting that don't know anything about sports betting. And I think that's a great way to turn people off. You know, your odds boost of the week is on X, Y, and Z analysts pick, right? And they boost it to +110. But that guy is a historical 45% better. He's a losing bettor. Your odd boost is really giving you money, because even at the +110 odds, based on his historical performance, he is going to be losing money and actually gaining money for the sportsbook. Now, obviously, that's part of their strategy. But, you know, getting content people that know what they're doing, that can engage, that can be educational, that can make it fun, like some of these big platforms do, but also teach people what they're doing is, I think, the big missing piece, because having people talk about sports betting that don't know what they're doing to people who don't know what they're doing, that that's a disaster waiting to happen. And I think we've seen it with some of these platforms.
I'll follow up quick. I mean, I totally agree with that. That the education piece is something. I mean, there's obviously a robust amount of people who already bet on the offshore market, but we're finding obviously that there are a lot of new bettors in the legal sports betting market. These are people that maybe only placed a bet when they went to Vegas. They were not regularly using offshore sites. So that's a huge piece. I think Eliot's spot on. And UX, to user experience, is really important. Like, just from my example, I live in Oregon where there's a monopoly, but the product here is bordering on abysmal from a user experience standpoint. Sometimes you can't log in, you can't get bets down. Like, improving the experience. And I don't know, you guys who get to use these apps every day maybe have a better sense than I do, but like, the UX is largely homogenous, and improving that, not having something that's special and different, having live betting that's really, really engaging and able to get down, without having to get your bet rejected or hit the button like 10 times. That's stuff that we don't necessarily have right now a ton of places, but I think that would be helpful especially in the retention, because you frustrate somebody. Again, I get frustrated. I don't have an option. You frustrate somebody in a New Jersey where you have, like Eliot said, 19 other sports books. You're suddenly running up against a problem.
As just to follow up on that, as someone who lives in New Jersey, is a very active sports bettor, the live betting aspect of this is incredibly frustrating. You put a line out there, I click a button, and then it changes by 2 because you see what I wanted to do. I don't really want to call out any individual providers. We're affiliate partners with a lot of these guys, but there are sports books that will, let's say you put 2 units on something, right? They'll only accept one of the units, and then they will immediately change the odds. So I place a $200 bet on, Packers, Aaron Jones over 42.5 receiving yards. I'm just making things up, right? They accept 100 of it. They give me back the 100, and now I look, and now it's 43.5 with minus 130. That's nonsense. Like, that creates a terrible experience where I don't want to use that book anymore, where if every time I bet something, you're like, well, this guy's won before, we're just immediately changing the lines on him. That's a bad experience.
Some of this is just tech and bookmaking, though, too, right? I mean, some of what you're saying is happening, but some of it's just like there's a lag, and the tech is not caught up to the ability to offer live odds. Like, again, you hit the button, and it's like, okay, well, there's a lag. The book has changed, the algorithm has changed what the odds are. You're not able to get down them, or it says, okay, then I'm going to hit on this, and it doesn't accept that bet. Again, using my example, and I know it's a problem in other states and other books too, is that the live betting experience, while that's key, and it's going to be a lot of the market, and already is, but it's not a great experience, especially depending on what book you're at, I think, right now.
Yeah, and 70% of betting is live. Yeah. So that's really important to mention. And then the last point I would make that I forgot to mention was that something that I thought FanDuel did a phenomenal job with was they were the first ones to come out with the single game parlay, where you could parlay Patrick Mahomes yards, the Chiefs over, and Tyreek Hill. And that was a way that you could bet on something that you hadn't been able to do before. And now we see PointsBet and MGM replicate it. But finding ways to create betting opportunities that don't exist out there, that are ways for people to actually do parlays that aren't completely destructive. That goes back to the retention thing with the marketing, is that I think one of the problems is that the biggest thing you see on social media are parlays that hit where a guy put $5 on 22 teams and won $11,000. Good luck doing that. You are going to lose money. And the books love it because they make over 20% returns on those, as opposed to less than 10% on any individual sport. So they're trying to set you up to become a customer that is losing. And the other one is these massive bets. Someone in Australia bet $1.5 million on the Packers. This is, to me, the wrong way to educate as well. So the books pushing parlays and big bets, I think, is the wrong approach.
I would just add to what you guys said that, again, if we go back to the audience, and that's who we always start with, there might be 3 or 4 different audiences, but let's create 2. There's one, someone who really understands sports betting, and then there's generally everybody else. Okay. And when you think about the new entrants, and we did a big study last spring where there's 90% overlap now between fantasy sports players and sports betting, which is huge. And a lot of those fantasy sports players are moving towards sports betting, which is exactly what DraftKings and FanDuel strategy has always been. And so, but the point here is that many people who are new don't even understand the vernacular and need to be educated about what the content actually means and what it's all about. And there's too many players out there, platforms and others, that use vernacular and content for established players. And it's just another thing in terms of thinking about how you're going to communicate and brand with your audience that makes it easier for them as well.
Let's see. Is there a good reader question? Daryl asked, where do you see the current U.S. bettor fitting into the global soccer market, whether it's Europe, South America, or even the U.S.? Anybody have any good thoughts on U.S. bettors in soccer?
It'll be a tiny market. It's always going to be a tiny percentage of the market. I think the thing that they've got going for it is that it happens early in the morning and when there's not other things to bet on, specifically during the week. I remember when I used to work in finance, the most popular game were always the World Cup games or anything like that were happening at 9 o'clock in the morning for people looking for a distraction for entertainment bets. So I think that's probably the biggest soccer market. The diehard, the big money soccer market is going to, I think, be a very, very small percentage in America.
That's why table tennis was so big, though, right, Eliot? Is that it's like at a time when nothing else is going on, so people are like, "What's there to bet on right now?" And here's you go to the live tab on any sports book, and like, here's table tennis. I'm going to bet on table tennis, I guess. And yeah, that's the advantage of soccer is that it's EPL and other leagues are getting more exposure in the U.S., but it is still, I think, unless the United States becomes a world powerhouse in soccer, we have, the MLS starts becoming as big as other leagues, which these things are decades off. I think soccer is going to be a pretty small part of it.
Yeah, just to follow up on that point, like the Hawaii game is one of the most popular bet games, right? Because it's the only game that's happening. And then when the Hawaii game ends, you find degenerates asking questions about snooker. Whenever a sport is a standalone event, it always has advantages because people are looking for something to do.
Okay. And I guess I do want to go to another viewer question, but I do want to ask this because we're on a topic of kind of growing and emerging potentially betting markets. But where do you guys see esports fitting in? We saw some of that in the pandemic when there's no real traditional sports except for table tennis. That's traditional. Where do you see esports going?
Esports is a pretty different customer than the traditional sports bettor. Even the fans are fairly different, and it's a whole another ball of wax for trading too. Like you have to have people specially doing this. We said live betting is a huge part of the market. Like having the ability to trade live on esports is a totally different competency. That there are firms out there that can and will do this, but it's not baked into a lot of sports books. It's relatively small. It has remained relatively small at the major books like Pinnacle and others that offer it pretty widely in Europe. So I don't know. Esports will someday the interest in it just from a fan perspective should translate to sports betting, but I think you're marketing to a different customer too. You're just putting esports next to everything in your sports book I don't think that's a super compelling offer.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's going to be big, but that audience doesn't spend a ton of money right now. So as opposed to sports betting, so the money hasn't come yet, from a standpoint of spending on the platforms, but eventually I think it will be big.
Yeah, I would say the two things that are important. One is that it just became legal on a lot of sports books. It wasn't even offered in New Jersey till recently. And two is that I think esports had its shine when there weren't other sports going on. This isn't betting, but looking at the daily fantasy market, they started to have contests with $100,000 top prizes. Now that other sports have come back, like top prizes are $5,000 to $10,000. So I still think it is it's a ways off before America embraces it on the gambling side.
Okay, cool. So the industry data shows a tale of two cities. On the one hand, there's several states that recorded record handles. We kind of touched on that earlier with New Jersey for the month of August. And the HPLDS study found that 75% of respondents reported no change or showed more interest in playing fantasy sports or sports betting, even with the possibility of a start-stop on a play due to COVID-19. On the other hand, the study found that 40% of respondents have scaled back the amount of money they bet, and 30% have scaled back the amount of fantasy they play. How do you explain the rapid advances while we're seeing large chunks of users scale back their, playing?
I would think new users, right? I mean, there's more states continue to legalize, so there are definitely, betting a lot of people aren't winning bettors. A lot of people play fantasy for fun, don't end up money, and when money becomes tight, they scale back. But there are more people who are doing it as well.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll just say that, I mean, the addressable audience, like I said, has become, just in the past year, has grown a lot. We've added Colorado, Illinois, Indiana has been live for a year, but is growing as well. We just have a larger addressable audience. If we had been talking about this a year ago, we'd really be looking at New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Nevada, West Virginia, which is a relatively small state. So we're constantly adding this, and this goes into what we've been talking about is education. And we have other states coming live, and like we just did a story about some bettors in Virginia, who some of them bet offshore. They weren't even aware that the state had passed a law. That's the kind of education that you still have to do, and I think that it dovetails with all of this information that the study provided.
Building on kind of just more people joining the market of legal market. There was an analyst the other day that said DraftKings could reach $100 a share once if California legalizes. So I guess it's kind of building on some things you mentioned earlier, but also Marty, a viewer, asked how much of an advantage does DraftKings DFS give them in the sports book race? So I guess you could say that about FanDuel. I know Monkey Knife Fight is a daily fantasy provider who might be eventually going to sports betting. They're targeting sports partnerships in not yet legal markets. So I guess what kind of advantage does DFS give some of these sports books for user acquisition in the long run?
I feel like it's a huge advantage because, and that's really the kind of the script that DraftKings and FanDuel followed, and Monkey Knife Fight has its own strategy to do it now, because you're building, in some cases, a very loyal base through DFS, through fantasy, and then you're turning that base over to your sports book when it's legalized. So it become, but the experience has to be really good. But the brand following is really important, and that goes to building a strong brand with those different audiences, which clearly overlap. So being able to if you're a fantasy player and your aspiration is to eventually become some kind of sportsbook player, being able to build in your area is really critical to do it. I mean, I think it is really important because that brand loyalty will exist. There's no doubt about it.
Here's the wild part is that daily fantasy, there's more investments in daily fantasy right now than any time than like 2015 when DraftKings and FanDuel were raising all of this money. Like, I don't know about you, Pat, but I get pitches from fantasy companies that I've never even heard of recently. Like, I mean, I can name 5 that have pitched me or I've become aware of within the past couple months and have raised money. There's Underdog Fantasy, which is some of the guys behind Draft, which was acquired by FanDuel. There's they've raised a lot of money. We talked about Monkey Knife Fight, Prize Picks. There's Thrive Fantasy. There's Super Draft. There's a ton of this because you have access to all these states that don't have sports betting yet. You can market to them, and you can then sell the database later, turn into your own sports book, whatever your plan is. You can market to the rest of the country, to California, New York, Texas, Florida. Those are the 4 biggest states here, and do not have online sports betting, and none of them may have in the short term. New York's probably the best out of those. So it's really interesting how much that there's money and interest flowing back into DFS in today's world.
Well, it's something they can do that the sports books can't. So you can see, right, Dustin, why the money's flowing in. There's just so much opportunity if they execute right in terms of the advantage they have of going into those markets and building, while the sports books literally cannot go in until they open up.
Yeah, and I was in 2015. I was covering every day. There was a different deal between DraftKings and FanDuel and a sports team. That's happening again, at least in baseball. You know, the Monkey Knife Fight and Prize Picks have done deals with MLB teams, and you know, every day that we're overloaded with sports marketing deals between sports books and teams and leagues and things like that, to the point that they've almost become meaningless. But you know, when they're executed on the ground, like that's, you're engaging with that fan base and all of that. So, but yeah, the daily fantasy, it is an interesting thing that you can do this everywhere. That's why there's money and there's people getting into it now. When you think you'd be wanting to get into sports betting, you have a larger addressable audience in the US.
It is kind of interesting, just to add to that. I mean, a lot of these deals that are being done are to build brand, and they're smart. They're creating more brand relevance, you know, whether it's a deal with Michael Jordan or Jamie Foxx or sports teams. But the real question is whether that's creating conversion, whether it's creating loyalty. You know, and Pat, you might have been getting to this now, but our survey showed that almost 30% really look at family, friends, and influencers who they trust, not necessarily celebrity influencers, as a reason why they would go and try something, which is initial conversion. That's the number one reason. And so how to really leverage those people, you know, those people who you're close to, is really important. And it's why ESPN has done such an amazing job with their fantasy leagues, because you can create community together with those you know and those who you care about. And it's why other brands that have done the same, if you think of like other industries like messenger apps, they create social communities where people, they're only as strong as those on the apps. So it's an important part of actually brand building. And it goes, you know, I was just going to say, the big name type sponsorships, I don't think that's going to bring about the conversion and the retention that a lot of the platforms want. They'll do a lot for the brands. It's really how they get in the weeds, though, and use influencers that matter to kind of get to the right place.
Yeah, I firmly agree with that. Where obviously Draft was acquired by FanDuel, but when Draft launched their platform, I was one of the biggest traffic drivers for them, because I created drafts and I invited my Twitter followers to participate in drafts with me, and it had an incredible acquisition, more so than, you know, Jamie Foxx being on the cover of your website. I don't know that Jamie Foxx does much for sports bettor personally, but the original question of what advantage do they have? I think they have one of the biggest advantages is that you already have an account. They can market directly to you, but that your money, like as someone who plays DFS and bets on DraftKings and FanDuel, the money's attached. The accounts it's a click away and the money is attached. And if I win money in DFS, I can bet it. And if I win money in betting, I can play it in DFS. You know, having that stuff attached is, I think, a pretty massive advantage.
And you were talking about kind of family, friend, influencer realm. And I you know, there was in your survey, you talked to people and they want personalization. And so, Dustin, I know you picked a stat that said 36% of respondents said that they would become more loyal if the ads or promotions were more personal, witty, or connected. Can you just kind of talk about how personalization can play into loyalty and how that kind of looks in the future?
Sure. Is that aimed to me, Pat? Happy to talk. I wasn't sure who that you were asking the
question. I think it was
question.
to Dustin, but you can answer, sure.
Oh, go ahead, please jump in.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I mean, yeah, again, retention, you know, it's not one size fits all for marketing. Like you send the same email out to every single person. You're not going to hit on everything. That person may not, you know, you put out a promo about Major League Baseball. Maybe that person cares not a whit about baseball. If you know that customer and know what they're doing and what they're betting on, what they like to bet on, and you personalize an offer, then that's way more appealing than, blanket here. Everybody can bet on this. Go have at it. Like I definitely get that and see that. I'll just caution there's a little bit of a responsible gambling issue here. If you're targeting something like where that person's not good at betting at something, the targeting can be a good thing in terms of retention and getting that customer engaged. But there's a line where you're trying to push them to bet too much on a certain thing that maybe they're not really good at betting on. And you have that data on your side. Just being real careful about how that interplays. It'd be a shame if we got too far down that rabbit hole and started seeing problems for sports books and regulated markets.
Okay. Eliot, I know you said 27% of respondents said that they'd become more loyal if the company developed relevant content, and you touched on that earlier. But how can operators be better at that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to sound egotistical here, but having more shows with people like me. It doesn't have to be me. I mean, though, any sports books listening, if you want to give me money, I'm more than happy to take it. It's really about finding shows with people who can be entertaining, who have a history of betting and betting successfully, and can educate people. If I'm gonna watch the Jets Broncos game and Thursday night, I'm damn sure betting on it because I'm not watching Brett Rippon versus Sam Darnold for fun, right? But how do I bet on it? I don't know. Who do I like? Well, the Jets stink, the Broncos stink. I don't like. Do I just take the under? Have some people talk about the game and break it down from a perspective that's both entertaining, but actually teaches people something about what to look for. Help people develop a process for how to study a game. Help people understand what numbers matter and what numbers don't. Because the biggest media outlets, because we dumb down our content in general, are not providing relevant statistical information in terms of what's predictive and what's not predictive. So finding a way to make analytics fun, I think, is a huge way to create content that will help people have some more success in betting. And they will then, if that content is on your platform, they will stay on your platform. And the longer you are on the platform, the more likely you are to make another bet or purchase something or whatever it is, right? So I think, doing that kind of content is something that most of these sports books are completely missing.
And I'll tell you guys, you guys have really good people. Brad Evans is one of the best at educating and being entertaining and not being too in the weeds. I totally agree. That's the kind of content that should be compelling moving forward as the U.S. develops.
We're running close to running into our close soon. So let's just go around, get your final thoughts. Dustin, let's start with you.
Yeah, I've been looking at these questions too, as well as I was trying to think of who's doing the best with technology to engage with fans. It's an interesting question. I'm not sure anybody's doing absolutely great. Again, I hate to just say DraftKings and FanDuel are doing it right, but they have multiple ways they engage with people across platforms, doing free to play contests, just lots of interesting things. The biggest takeaway for me, just as sports betting, is and we've been saying this long, don't be homogenous. Especially if you're trying to differentiate a product, like just putting your sportsbook app with the same old UX that everybody else has, the same lines, nobody knows your brand. Like, that's not a compelling offer to anyone. What are you doing to not be homogenous with everybody else and you may agree or disagree with what that is, but being non-homogenous is what I see is interesting. PointsBet, is a good example, I think, from that standpoint, where they find different ways to get their content out there, to engage with their users. Some people, they sometimes refund bets, and people disagree with that, but it's different. It's something that's different that they're doing when there's some weird thing that happens in the game. They refund the bets, they get some PR out of it, they do something different. I'm just looking for different, because again, if you're not DraftKings, FanDuel, or one of these companies with hundreds of millions of dollars of capital to deploy, you have to do something different. So that's what I look at, is like, what are you doing to differentiate yourself? And that's a lot of what we've talked here is about differentiation and looking at how to retain customers and things like that. Be different, and maybe being bold is too much, but you got to at least be different, because just being the same as everyone else is just not good. If you can't have just the same product as a DraftKings and FanDuel, that's not gonna beat anyone. You have to do something different than they are.
Awesome. Eliot, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think be different is spot on. I think there are lots of ways to be different, and I think don't be scared is a big one. Going back to books, offshore books, Bet Online used to release lines before everyone else, which got them talked about, and they lost on some of those lines, but they were willing to do that. PointsBet creating the points betting system, right, where you can win or lose more based on how right or how wrong you are. Refunding bets on bad beats is great for marketing. It also makes that customer happy because he just had something that really sucks happen to him, right? So being different, being bold. I actually, I'm going to go a step further than Dustin. I think being bold is smart. Stop trying to do the same thing as everybody else, just with a different skin on your app. And again, the last one for me is customer service. Understand that people have a lot of money on your application, and 24-hour response time and not really engaging with people and not giving them direct answers and sending them to a bunch of different spots that's to me, people are going to get frustrated in the betting market. It's a new market they're learning, and work with them. Don't throw them aside. I think is a huge way you can have an advantage.
Ed, your closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think Dustin and Eliot really touched a lot on the importance of brand and what it can do in the experience. I'll just kind of move a little bit left and just say, I know there's a lot, we didn't talk about it as much, but probably people on this who might be thinking about conversion. How do I convert more? What do I do? Good conversion and the experience they have will lead to loyalty. But some are just even wondering, there are three core things about conversion in this order. One is influencers are really important. So think about that in terms of your customer and who that customer knows and who that customer is influencing, because the number one thing is being referred in, and they'll try it then. You'll get a conversion. And then the question is, what's the experience after that? Two, I would say, is it simple? Is it easy? It's all the things these guys are saying. Is it streamlined? Is it fun? All those things are really important to keep that target audience. And the last thing I'll just say is they're coming there because they've either heard or seen or something's been pushed to them with a value proposition. Make sure the value prop that they've read about or have been told about is what they're actually getting when they come to your site. And if it's not, then they sit there and say, and the psychological bell goes off simply that very quickly, like, I know I was referred to this, but I don't want to try it. So that value prop has to come on loud and clear.
Well, that'll wrap us up. I would like to thank all of you for joining us today for this Sports Are Back webinar by Hot Paper Lantern Digital Sport. A special thank you to Dustin and Eliot for joining Ed and I in this conversation. Be on the lookout for an email with more information about the study we referenced, Quarterly Pulse, Shifting Consumer Attitudes Toward Fantasy and Sports Betting, as well as our upcoming webinars. And remember, we want to hear from you. Thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to continuing this conversation online.
Thank you, Pat.